Hi, I'm Ariel Baska. I'm a filmmaker, journalist, author, and disability advocate. And I'm here to talk a little bit about complex PTSD in the pandemic, in this month of mental health awareness, and specifically in the Ghouls series of Held by Horror. One of the things that I think the pandemic has definitely contributed to is us all getting to know ourselves a little better, sometimes more than we really wanted to, in fact. In my case, that certainly was the case, given that I got a diagnosis of complex PTSD when I suddenly realized that I've been having these flashbacks all my life and these feelings of shame and guilt and reliving traumatic events on a fairly regular basis, but I never had time to kind of stop and take stock and think about it until the pandemic happened and everything shut down, and all of a sudden, all we had was self-reflection. TikTok has been a great wormhole for a lot of people to discover what's going on in their personal journeys, and that certainly was no different for me. But I found that through film, and specifically through two horror films that I'm going to talk about today, I discovered a lot about myself and a lot about what the healing process is like for me as someone who is both held by horror and healed by horror. There are so many films that play far differently in the pandemic for me, but there's one in particular that helped me through the process of being isolated with my own thoughts as a person with CPTSD, and that is A.T. White's Starfish. Starfish is a film about a woman who's grieving for the loss of her best friend, and really it deals with a world in isolation. And that world is depicted with horror, with beautiful visual effects and animation in this kind of post-apocalyptic landscape that has this self-reflexive way of looking at the world. And it's a gloriously life-affirming film while also being very, very validating when you are in that state of hyper-arousal and shame and guilt, reliving your traumatic experiences and experiencing nightmares and flashbacks. The character at the heart of Starfish is, trying to avoid certain situations and in a lot of ways kind of running from herself. And this lack of emotional regulation and changes in consciousness that happen throughout this film are really powerful for me in terms of both understanding my own condition and gaining some kind of self-awareness about my own need to run away. And I have to say that of all the horror that I watched in the pandemic, while this is certainly not the most horrific of the horror films that I watched, it is the one that I go back to again and again when I feel the need to feel healed. Because even though the monsters in this film are both metaphorical and real, I always find that it's better to confront them head on in this film than it is in the real world. The dissociation of the animation sequence is absolutely thrilling. And one of the things that I've always thrilled to most within this film is the feeling of not even knowing what you're looking at. The feeling that, your hands are not quite real somehow, which is something that my other favorite film shares in common with this, in My Skin, Dans Ma Peau. But I want to just say this post-apocalyptic world is an amazing place as A.T. White creates it. And this quote, "I wonder if the world still exists if I choose to ignore it," and confronting the monsters that absolutely will not let you ignore them, is something that this film does so well that I always want to revisit it. and I hope you will too, or at least take a visit with it, because it's a fascinating story that helped me reflect on who I am and the needs that I have for my own mental health in the pandemic. And I hope Starfish can be that for you too. Or if not, maybe at least you learn something from this video and can actually be held and healed by horror.